The coaching search has begun here in Jacksonville for a new head coach for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we will discuss all of it by peeling the layers back here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, it is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. Man, we got a heavy show for you today, and we're going to get right to it. Make sure you tap in everywhere you watch or listen to and view your podcast so you do not miss an episode of Locked On Jaguars. You can start the season or the playoff season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can make and place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose. First $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Shout out to the everydayers for joining us every single day. And if it's your first time, I hope you love it and come right back. Here's what we're going to talk about. The Jaguars can learn from Washington when it comes to having this fear that you can't tear it all down and rebuild it in 1 year. We're just going to fix that right now. They have too much of a single-minded focus, and some of us in the media, including me sometimes, we're all guilty of it. We'll discuss why that is dangerous. And the Jaguars need a solution seeker, not a problem solver. Things that have gone on here ain't nobody's responsibility to come in here and fix. They just need to find solutions and ways for this team to win. We are going to discuss all of this. I'm going to do it a little bit different. As y'all know, I have two shows here on Locked On, the Locked On Podcast Network. One with the Jacksonville Jaguars that y'all have seen me do for about 5 years. But for about the last 4 or 5 months, I've been doing Locked On NFL PM, where Tyler Rowland does Locked On NFL AM. Both, please tune in to both. There's a little shameless plug here, but it's relevant. It's about the Jaguars coaching search. Now, my guest on Wednesday is David Harrison, who covers the Washington Commanders. He also does our Locked On NFL Squad shows. He also, for a number of years, had another job, and that was while he was doing Washington, he was doing Tampa, also Locked On Bucks. So he's seen a team win a Super Bowl, and then he was covering a Super Bowl winning team, and then he also covered a bad franchise in Washington. Now he's seen the turnaround, and ironically, those two teams are playing in the playoffs this week. But I got David on today, and we discussed a lot about the Jaguars and this coaching search, and I wanted to share that with you. It was more difficult to edit all of this and put it in place than it was for me. It took more time than it did take for me to come on here and talk about the Jaguars. But, you got to be selfless. So for each segment, I'm going to give you a big chunk of Locked On NFL because it's relevant, okay? I want you to take a listen in segment 1 to David Harrison explain why the Jaguars need a solutions seeker and give his perspective on some of the things that I explained to him that happened here in Jacksonville at the press conference. Check out David Harrison of Locked On Commanders along with me on Locked On NFL. One, we'll start in Jacksonville, and I'm going to let you give your spiel on some of the things. First, I got to set it up by telling you that Shad Khan feels that if you fire the coach and the GM, that you have to fire 85 other people in the building also, and that's one of the rationales he used. He also said, well, who are you going to get to find better? That him and Trent Baalke are going to go looking for a coach. And if that coach comes in and says that he doesn't necessarily want to work with Baalke and he can present a plan that is better, then he'll listen to it. I think all of that is Bush League. I think it's really a bunch of crap about people not wanting to make decisions. Just knowing what I just told you, how does that sound? Does that sound, with your experience with Washington, who had the worst run organization, not only in football, but in sports, and they did it and flipped it in one season. So tell me, what is your thought on that?
It basically sounds to me like an owner who is focusing on problems and not focusing on solutions. Come on, you can give yourself all the reasons in the world to not do something, especially when it seems hard or it feels hard. But the mark of a true leader is doing the hard stuff when the hard stuff needs to be done. Ooh. And you have to have these uncomfortable conversations with people, and you have to have these uncomfortable moments. But you can't just sit here and say we're going to just continue to try to do the majority of what we've been doing, but we're going to change a little bit here, a little bit there. Like, bro, your recipe is not one ingredient away from being 5-star.
Come on.
Your recipe is 2-star at best. And one of the main parts of that recipe you're keeping around for some reason, man. I felt bad for you, bro. As soon as I saw this news come out, I just thought about Wig. I was like, man.
And you know what Wig did?
For another year.
Yeah, and Wig thought about 950,000 people that are either fans or season ticket holders that travel around like the Bowl City Brigade does. Wig thought about them, and Wig thought about people that fit in all three of those categories. Peacock and Williamson. Peacock's out obviously right now tending to family, but Ross Jackson has sat in for him for a minute, and he asked Matt Williamson, who is the former NFL scout and who is my Friday host here on Locked On NFL, what he thinks about the Jaguars, their job, and a certain candidate. Check this out.
Just looking across the NFL, to no one's surprise, the three big names that we're seeing everywhere: Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel. Let's start off with Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. We spoke a little bit about him yesterday and how good that fit feels for him over in Jacksonville. And well, he's early on Jacksonville's list.
Yeah, I like the fit quite a bit. I mean, it's just because I think Lawrence has so much untapped potential. And frankly, if you look at the final stats or EPA or DVOA of the Jacksonville offense this year, half of the year was with Mac Jones. It wasn't that terrible. I mean, it really wasn't. And if you could put his, panache on it and maybe do a little bit on defense, I don't think they're that far off. I mean, that owner has shown that he will spend.
Yeah, all of that's true, and I appreciate Matt saying that. Ben Johnson seems like number one on everybody's list. I know the Jaguar fan base feels that way. I know you have experienced the Ben Johnson effect last year with Washington, and he obviously chose not to accept that job. To me, he's the top candidate, and I like Liam Cohen, who we're going to talk about later on, for the Bucs, and I also like Aaron Glenn. And I don't care whether they hire a play caller or not. I need them to first hire a leader of men and let him hire a play caller, even if he's a defensive coach, kind of like Dan Campbell did.
Yeah, listen, that's the question. You just hit it right on the head. We all know Ben Johnson can scheme up an offense. We know that Ben Johnson can call plays. We know that Ben Johnson knows the X's and O's. But I always go back to what Bruce Arians said, two-time coach of the year, resurrected the Arizona Cardinals, resurrected the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, kept the Colts going while his head coach was battling cancer. I mean, the resume speaks for itself. And what Bruce Arians always said is, it's not about the X's and O's. It's about the Jimmies and Joes. And how does Ben Johnson impact the Jimmies and Joes? Because that's going to ultimately decide how successful he is as a head coach. We get wrapped up, and I say we as in media, I say we as in fans, and I say we sometimes as an NFL franchise, we get wrapped up about, man, this guy's offense scored 47 points a game. Man, this guy's defense had 5 interceptions a game. That's amazing. But if your head coach can't rally the troops when the three phases don't work together, when the defense gives up 30 points and the offense scores 30 or 29 points and you lose, or when the offense scores 14 points and the defense gives up 15 points and you lose. If you can't rally the troops, what you're going to end up with is infighting. You're going to end up with coaches blaming each other, pointing the finger at each other. And I just always go back to when you hear Detroit Lions players talk about their team, Dan Campbell always comes up. Dan Campbell always comes up. Aaron Glenn comes up when you hear defensive players talk. I don't hear enough offensive players talk about Ben Johnson, and it's not evidence that he's not a good leader, and I don't want to pitch it as that. But Ben Johnson's ability to scheme up a scheme with Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jared Goff is not the main criteria for whether or not he should be a head coach. How he is as a leader of men, like you just said, what staff he's going to bring is a big part of this, and how he sees coming into it. Right now, you have to understand as an owner, GM, making this hire, whatever it is, that once the guy gets on ground and gets his hands on the roster, things can change. But how much of a grip do you have on this roster today? Because if I'm a head coach candidate and I sit down and Tony Wiggins is the GM and says, okay, David Harrison, you want to be the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, what's your plan for Trevor Lawrence? Say, I think Trevor Lawrence is a really good young man, good quarterback, he's got a good skill set. I think we can win with him. What did I just tell you? I didn't tell you a darn thing. I didn't say anything to you. And what does that tell you if you're listening to me? It means I don't know. And if I don't even have a plan, and I'm not saying that Ben Johnson doesn't, let me understand. Let's get this clear. But there's a lot more to this job than can he call a scheme? Okay? Yep. Like there's a lot more. Like that's calling the scheme just gets you in the door. You got to have the rest of it. And I'll be honest with you, Wig, we've heard a lot of reasons why Ben Johnson pulled himself out of the Washington Commanders job, whether it go from what quarterback he wanted versus the quarterback Adam Peters wanted, whether it goes to he just loved the Detroit Lions and wanted to continue that ride. But I look at the guy they hired because, remember, Ben Johnson was like everybody's number one pick, but then it was Mike McDonald, Bobby Slowick, like even Aaron Glenn was in there. Like there was a lot of names before Dan Quinn. But who ended up getting hired? Dan Quinn. And what was Dan Quinn? What did Dan Quinn bring with him? Dan Quinn brought with him an all-star staff. I mean, you're talking Anthony Lynn, former head coach, Brian Johnson, former offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, former head coach, Joe Witt Jr., his defensive coordinator, a Super Bowl winning secondary coach from his days with the Green Bay Packers. And you just go down the list. Ken Norton Jr., Jason Simmons. I mean, look at Darryl Tapp. Look at the staff that he brought with him. And then look at here's who we're going to be as Washington Commanders. I'm telling you, bro, from introductory press conference to wild card round of the playoffs, Dan Quinn's message has been the same on who a Washington Commander is, what the Washington Commanders are going to be. And not only that, but every move he's made, bro, he has released first-round draft picks. He has traded first-round draft picks. This has not been a system of saying, we're going to come in here timid. We're going to come here and figure it out. We're going to come here and see what we want to see. No, this is who we are. This is who we are from a staff and who we're going to be from a roster, and we're going to shape that roster that way, hell or high water. I don't know that Ben Johnson would have got this job, to be quite honest with you. After seeing what Dan Quinn brought to this organization, I don't know that Ben Johnson would have got this job. And imagine, this works, Wig. Imagine the Washington Commanders interview Ben Johnson, fly to Detroit to interview Ben Johnson, and they give the job to Dan Quinn. What is that to Ben Johnson's stock? These guys have agents. If his agent's getting wind that, hey, Dan Quinn blew the socks off these dudes, and Ben Johnson can't blow the socks off because this isn't against Ben Johnson. Ben hasn't been in the league like Dan Quinn has been in the league. He doesn't have the connections that Dan has. And guess what? Pete Carroll, someone who Dan is tied to, retired. That opens up a lot of coaches that are tied to Pete Carroll that no longer have Pete to tie themselves to. All of these things. Ben Johnson doesn't have those, man. Ben Johnson is the Dan Campbell tree. How big is the Dan Campbell tree? It's a sapling. In relativity to the rest of the coaching trees, it's a sapling. So I'm not saying Ben Johnson can't be a good head coach. I'm just saying, and I said this last year because I knew he was the sexiest name. I like the name as well, but I had these reservations. I said, look, we're falling too in love with the offense in Detroit. That's not all that Ben Johnson has to bring. It's just like drafting who wins the national championship this year? That quarterback should be the number one overall pick. No, because that just gets your foot in the door of the conversation. You got to look at the rest of it.
So you're right. Here's the leader of men part of it.
I know I took that offline, bro. I'm sorry.
No. Listen, Dan Quinn played tight end. Do you think TJ Hawkinson is a good football player? I do.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Quinn, they had TJ Hawkinson. Dan Quinn and Brad Holmes traded him in the division. I don't care. Yeah, go get Sam Laporta. And they asked Sam Laporta to block all game, one game, and then the next game they'll throw it to him 5 times. You know who makes that? A leader. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the 3 best running backs in the NFL. Would you agree?
Yep.
Maybe 4. Highly paid. Doesn't start. David Montgomery does. You know who can make that happen without them guys pouting and snatching each other's chains off? A leader of men. See, that's the way this is going, man. It's all about leader, and you need a problem solver. You need a solution seeker, rather, as opposed to a problem solver. We got more from David coming up. We're going to focus now on this single-minded focus, like the folks that just want a guy who does this one good thing. And the Jaguars need more than that. We'll discuss that and a whole lot more here in just a second on Locked On NFL. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. That is right, man. FanDuel is our sponsor for today here on Locked On NFL. I know the football season is almost over, but guess what? From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Visit the website and share betting lines around your team and league with your friends so you guys can come up with the right picks on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's show is brought to you and sponsored by Prize Picks, man. We're going to win money all day here. It's playoff time, and you're like me. If you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. I've been playing this for a while now, and I'm pretty sure that when this playoff game starts, that my man Saquon Barkley is going to get a whole bunch of carries, and Philly is going to depend on him. So you need to make sure you look at that and go more with Saquon. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the code Locked On NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. You need to make sure you run your game. All right, moving right along here on Locked On NFL, a little bit of a special edition of Locked On Jaguars, a little bit of a special edition for me because I also get to incorporate my other show, which is Locked On NFL, because it was very, very Jaguars centric today. And I appreciate my friend David Harrison for doing that. Once again, David Harrison of Locked On Washington Commanders, as well as Locked On Squad Shows, the squad shows that we have, the host of the squad shows. I think he does a real good job of breaking it down from his experience of how Washington proceeded and moved with the thought of Ben Johnson being their head coach last year, which is what everybody thought was going to happen. Now, I'm going to tell you, this is not an anti-Ben Johnson thing. We both like Ben Johnson, but we just want folks to broaden their mind a little bit on what it's going to take. And the reason why I'm so hard on this is because this is Trevor Lawrence's second contract, the beginning of it, and it's his third offensive coordinator and his third head coach. These are the things that we need to understand. This is probably the most critical part of whether or not Trevor Lawrence is going to turn out to be everything or some of the things that people wanted him to be. So listen to David as we got more into what has to happen and why you cannot operate in what I call scared money. One of the things that I don't like about these conversations and decisions is when someone goes, yeah, I really like Kellen Moore. I heard it on the radio yesterday with one of my dear friends. He said, I like Kellen Moore. One, he's played in it. He'd be good for Trevor because he's played in the NFL. He was a quarterback. He can relate to the position, and that really helps Trevor. So we just forget that Doug Pederson also been playing in the NFL. The dude that just fired has that same description in his bio, right? So it's like, don't say that. That means nothing to me right now because we've done that already, right? I mean, it can't be that, and that alone can't be the thing that you plant a flag on, bro, because the coach you're firing won a Super Bowl and is an Andy Reid disciple and play quarterback. I mean, if that's the case, then why don't you just keep him, right?
And Jalen Hurts hasn't gotten any better this year under Kellen Moore. And I would ask you, how many coaches followed Kellen Moore from Dallas to Los Angeles and then from Los Angeles to Philly?
Yeah, there you go. So see, that's the point. And now we can make that argument about Cliff Kingsbury, but I do believe that Kingsbury, he was circumvented by Bidwill. That whole deal out there in Arizona, this was just a bad situation for him to be in. I think he's learned. I think he's had to take a little bit of a step back. And that's why I think the next step will be big. But I want you to explain to us some of the things that Washington has done. When they took over, they didn't say, well, we can't do this and we can't do that and we can't do this. And we ain't trying. Like Shah Khan said that he wanted to find somebody that could come in and that is comfortable with what we're doing. And I want him to find somebody who is totally uncomfortable with being one of the worst run franchises in the league. Right. I want y'all to be uncomfortable when that person comes into this building because that's the only way things are going to shake.
Yeah, you can't have somebody come in that building and say, we want you to be comfortable with what we're doing because what you're doing is being one of the worst teams in the worst division in football. Nobody should be comfortable doing that. You should not be comfortable doing that if you're Shah Khan. So that's crazy in the first place. And it actually leads me to my first point. The first thing the Washington Commanders did to turn this thing over in year one is not be afraid to win. This goes back to Ryan Poles, Chicago Bears. They interviewed Cliff Kingsbury. Lauren Cox of Locked On Bears says they were never going to offer Cliff Kingsbury the offensive coordinator job. That 100% was always about getting as much intel on Caleb Williams as they possibly could because, like I said, they were locked in on Caleb from January. The official story, or quote-unquote official story coming out of Chicago, is they were worried, that if they brought Cliff Kingsbury in with Caleb Williams, they would have so much success that they would lose Cliff Kingsbury, and they'd have to figure out how to continue this success in Chicago that they had, because that would be terrible to have all this success and then lose the offensive coordinator. You're scared of winning. Literally, if that is the official story, making decisions based off being scared of winning.
A good thing that ain't even happened yet.
That is an amazing problem to have. Now, if you're the Chicago Bears, you got to find a whole new coaching staff. Why? Because you lost, and you lost a lot. You know what I mean? So that's number one. Don't be afraid of winning. So if the defensive head coach is the best man for the job, brings the best staff, that's why I go back to Brian Flores. I know I said Cliff Kingsbury, Las Vegas Raiders, but remember I said my favorite coaching candidate this offseason, Brian Flores. If that is your top coaching candidate, go hire the man and go do what I said. Go draft Jalen Milroe with the 32nd pick. Trade up with whoever wins the Super Bowl who doesn't need a quarterback, and go get that fifth-year option and get your quarterback to groom. And you know what? Build yourself a staff. Now, I can't talk about Bobby Slowick and who's behind him with the Houston Texans. If the Houston Texans lose Bobby Slowick, I don't know what's going to happen to their offense. But I can tell you what's happening here in Washington. If the Washington Bears lose Cliff Kingsbury, look, he is the architect of the offense. Make no mistake about it. However, they also have Anthony Lynn, who's a former NFL head coach, run game coordinator for this offense. They also have Brian Johnson, who is the pass game coordinator, assistant head coach for this offense. I believe Brian Johnson would step up into that offensive coordinator role. And as the pass game coordinator, guess what he's been doing all year long? Working with Jaden Daniels in this Cliff Kingsbury offense, learning what Jaden likes to do best, learning what he doesn't do best, learning the weapons, learning. So you're not going to reinvent the wheel here. My prediction is you're going to promote from within. Then you bring in a new pass game coordinator. Now, well, what if Brian Johnson goes to, say, Vegas with Cliff Kingsbury? Okay, Anthony Lynn, congratulations. You've been in the room too. Now you're going to be our offense coordinator. We're going to go draft. We're going to go sign a new run game coordinator, new pass game coordinator. And what you do is you prepare solutions to the problem. And the problem here is we're winning so dang much that we keep losing our offensive coordinators. So keep having future offensive coordinators in the wings, and not just one, two, because that guy who gets that coach job might take one of your guys to go be his offensive coordinator. Now you need another guy. That's what Dan Quinn has done. Now, again, that's just my speculation. I'm not telling you that's what Dan Quinn has said or is going to do, but the way that you just read the tea leaves, defensive head coach, Cliff Kingsbury leaves, what's the solution? You got two coordinators behind him who both have a good amount of experience, who now both could potentially move up and have been working with Jaden Daniels. So, yes, it's going to look a little bit different. It's not going to be exactly Cliff Kingsbury, but those differences are going to be born from what Jaden and this offense have already done, not a new guy coming in and saying, okay, I don't know what you did before, but here's what we're going to do now, like Liam Cohen did in Tampa. Now, it worked in Tampa, but we know that 9 times out of 10, it usually doesn't work very well when you do that. So, again, Chicago Bears, what you should have done is you should have hired Cliff Kingsbury, and you should have had Cliff Kingsbury bring in somebody to mentor behind him. And if you lose Cliff Kingsbury to head coaching position, congratulations, because that means you just made the playoffs. That means Caleb Williams probably offensive rookie of the year. That means you got all kinds of fanfare. You got all kinds of money. You got all kinds of love in the national media. That's not a problem, bro. But the Chicago Bears are making decisions based off of the problem of winning too much. That is the first step, to me, in a very long way of saying it, to turn your franchise.
More from David Harrison of Locked On Commanders, talking about things in the coaching search and in the job vacancies that I believe will benefit the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll get to more of that in just a second. I know y'all enjoying it, and we'll do it here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million. That's $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I use it, and my wife appreciates it because I use it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. One more time, I'm going to tell you, it's rocketmoney/locked-on. All right, third and final segment here of Locked On Jaguars, where we have heard from someone who has been through David Harrison, and you heard part of the Locked On NFL show where he's talked about some of the things that Washington had to go through, how the Ben Johnson whole thing played out, why you can't singularly focus on a guy that just does the one thing that you don't like. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example of why that's so important to Jaguar fans. The Jaguar fans were right to complain about the offense. The Jaguar fans were right to complain about Press Taylor. The Jaguar fans have been right about complaining about both Mike Caldwell and complaining about Ryan Nielsen and the hockey substitutions. All of these things they have been right about. The Jaguar fans have been right about complaining about Trent Baalke's free agency signings and the things that he has done. The Jaguar fans have been right about the fact that these guys just seem like they don't jive, even though they kept putting on this persona of some sort of united front. Now, one guy gets fired, one guy stays. Shad clearly said he talked to both people, and he made a decision that he knew what needed to be fixed. One of the things that I have said for months is don't just let them tell you it's one thing. I did. I told y'all to stop talking about Press Taylor so much. Don't let Doug off the hook. I said that they were soft, and I heard it in Doug's voice, and that gave a lot of ammunition to Baalke to point to things that don't sound like winning, and they didn't. I think Doug is such a nice guy that he never complained about Trent. I told you I didn't want Shad to have to make a choice between one or two of those guys, that just go ahead and get them out of here and start a clean sweep. And the clean sweep, he says, I don't know what you really mean what that is a bunch of BS, right? All of these things that we have mapped out over Locked On Jaguars for at least the last couple of years, and the fears that I had all the way going back to prior to 2022, they happen. They happen. And that's why I'm like this, man, because I said, I said, stop talking about Press. Not that Press wasn't the problem, but I knew that this team was not just one thing away from getting this right. You have to take the approach that David has spoken ad nauseum about what Washington has did when they flipped this whole thing. They got rid of everything. They changed the entire culture. You don't just need a haircut, man, or to lose 10 pounds off of sticking yourself in the stomach. You need to get your soul fixed. You need to get your spirit fixed. And while there are good parts and pieces, you heard Matt Williams say, I don't think they're far off. I don't think a team that is 11-5 is far off. I don't think Tampa's far off. I don't think Baltimore's far off. Hell, I don't think the Bengals are far off. I think any team that's picking in the top 5 is further away from what they want to do or what they need to be thinking about than it makes people comfortable enough to say it. I really do. The Jaguars are 4-13. You heard me? It's a long ways away from being able to compete for a championship. When you wake up today, do you believe that Trent Baalke is good enough to put the Jaguars in the Super Bowl? I don't think so, and I know you don't. I don't think if you gave him 5 more years, he's going to be able to do it. And that's the opportunity that Shad had today or this weekend, these past couple of days, and that's what's so disappointing. The things that Shad says are literally impossible to do. I just had an expert on that covers a team that literally did it. We talk about Detroit. We talk about all of these things. We talk about the Bills. If anything, when I say Bill, I don't mean the B-I-L-L-S. I mean the build. Just go back to when they had to make a decision on Trayvon and Aiden. And I'm not talking about who they should have picked. I'm just saying that both of these teams were in the exact same spot. They chose Doug Pederson. They chose the players that they chose. They spent the money that they spent in free agency. When Trent Baalke took this team over, they had draft picks galore. salary cap space galore, an empty canvas. They made a choice to hire Doug Pederson collectively. We don't even have to talk about who was there an edict given to get rid of Mike Caldwell and who hired Ryan Nielsen and who decided to have the hockey puck stuff. We don't even need to talk about that. See, that's the kind of stuff that kind of blinds you. We could just go back to the point that 3 years ago, they had a boatload of salary cap space. 3 years ago, they had a plethora of picks. They had the number one pick in the draft. They had a franchise quarterback that they had just chosen. They could have done anything they wanted to do. Under Trent's leadership, they went in a certain direction. They're back to where they started just a few years ago. And if you want to blame it all on Doug Pederson, that's fine. But remember this, Shah Khan and Trent Baalke, either one or the other or them collectively, no matter who was the leader, chose Doug Pederson. Now they fired Doug Pederson. We keep forgetting that if we consider that a mistake, which obviously it is, the same two people that made that mistake are going to lead this coaching search. The same two people that did that are going to do it again, and they're going to do it again with not the first pick, but the fifth pick in a draft where, people will say how weak or strong it is, with less salary cap space than they had before, but further distrust and disbelief from the fans that these people can get it done again. Insanity, I hate to say it because it's so cliche, but insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Insanity is also doing the same thing over and over with less resources and expecting a better result. It's not going to happen. And I'm sorry. And folks can think that I'm being mean or mean-spirited or hard all we want to. They chose to just change coaches as if it was all Doug's fault. Well, Doug was their decision. So ultimately, it was theirs. I don't trust it. And I'm sorry. I just can't. Hey, man, you guys, thanks for joining me here on Locked On Jaguars. Thanks for tuning in while I included Locked On NFL on this show. And also, thank you for David and Ross and all of the guys for allowing me to incorporate that into our show. Hopefully they learn, but doesn't seem like they are going to learn. We'll see how it shakes out with all of these coaching searches. Thank you for joining me here on Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you check out Locked On NFL each and every day, a double dose on the AM show with Tyler Rowland. He'll wake you up. I'm telling you, you ain't had an alarm clock that'll wake you up like that. And then you come by here, in the barbershop, and you hear what we got to say. Till then, till next time, man, I'll keep you abreast of everything that's going on around the National Football League with the Jaguars. Make sure you check me out on both shows. We'll see you here on Locked On Jaguars.